My name is Mike, and I am a 40-year-old man living in the suburbs of Chicago. I've been married to Rachel, a 43-year-old vibrant woman for 10 years. We met at a mutual friend's wedding and hit it off instantly, our connection undeniable. Together, we have two wonderful children, Sarah and Lizzie, aged 13 and 11. Our home is a modest two-story house on a quiet street, nestled in a neighborhood where kids play outside until the streetlights come on, and families know each other by name. Our house is a place filled with laughter, school projects, and weekend barbecues. The backyard, with its sprawling lawn and towering oak tree, often serves as the backdrop for family gatherings and impromptu soccer games. Inside, the walls are adorned with photos capturing moments of joy, birthdays, holidays, and vacations to the beach. I work from home in logistics, ensuring the smooth transport of goods across the country. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills and allows me to be present for my children. Rachel is the primary breadwinner, working as a high-level executive at a marketing firm. Her job demands long hours and frequent travel, but she's always made time for us, or so I thought. Our life seemed perfect on the outside, a picture of suburban bliss. However, cracks began to appear in the facade over the past few months. Rachel's behavior started changing subtly at first, then more noticeably. She became distant, her laughter less frequent, her temper shorter. The warmth that once defined our relationship seemed to dissipate, replaced by a cold, inexplicable distance. Despite these changes, I tried to remain optimistic. I chalked up her mood swings to work stress, believing that things would return to normal soon. Little did I know, the storm brewing beneath the surface was about to upend everything I thought I knew about my wife and our marriage. It began innocuously enough. Rachel had always been a bit of a night owl, but recently her late nights had become more frequent and extended beyond just staying up to watch TV or read. She would leave the house for work meetings or girls' nights that seemed to stretch longer each week. When she started coming home with flimsy excuses and vague explanations, a seed of doubt was planted in my mind. Her behavior grew more erratic. She started dressing more provocatively, spending more time in front of the mirror before heading out. She would often disappear for hours without explanation, and when pressed, she would respond with irritation, accusing me of being paranoid or controlling. Her phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter, was now always within her reach, often turned screen side down or locked away in her purse. One evening, Rachel returned home smelling of a perfume that wasn't hers. When I asked about it, she brushed it off, claiming it was a new scent she was trying out, yet there was no bottle of it in our house. Her dismissive attitude only deepened my suspicions. It wasn't just the perfume. There were other signs, too. Late-night texts and calls she would answer with a hushed voice or a sudden need for privacy. Our once active sex life had dwindled to almost nothing, replaced by excuses of exhaustion or stress from work. Driven by a gnawing need to know the truth, I decided to take a more direct approach. One night, while Rachel was in the shower, I checked her phone. My heart pounded as I navigated to her messages, but I found nothing, no incriminating texts, no suspicious calls. It was too clean, almost as if she had anticipated my move. My suspicions deepened when I noticed a new name appearing frequently in her conversations: Chris. Whenever I asked about him, Rachel would give vague replies, labeling him as just a work friend. But why was she so secretive about him? Why did she smile a little too brightly when she spoke his name? Unable to shake the feeling that something was amiss, I took further steps. I installed a GPS tracker on her car, feeling guilty for invading her privacy, but convinced it was the only way to uncover the truth. Over the next few weeks, I tracked her movements, noting the frequent trips to a particular address on the other side of town. It was a residential area, far from any office or work-related venue. One Friday evening, I decided to follow her. She left home around 7 p.m., dressed in a way that was far too casual for a work meeting, but too dressed up for a simple night out with friends. I trailed her car at a safe distance, my heart racing with each turn she took. She finally pulled up to a small, unremarkable house. I watched as she walked up to the door and was greeted by a tall man who hugged her intimately before they disappeared inside. The reality of what I was seeing hit me like a freight train. My suspicions were no longer just shadows in my mind. They were solid, painful truths unfolding before my eyes. Rachel was having an affair, and this man, Chris, was her lover. The hours I spent outside that house, Watching the lights flicker and imagining the betrayal taking place inside were some of the darkest of my life. Returning home that night, I felt a heavy weight settle in my chest. The person I had shared my life with, the mother of my children, had shattered our bond. The next steps were unclear, but one thing was certain. My life had been irrevocably changed by the woman I once trusted with everything. The tension had been building for weeks, and I knew I couldn't let it go on any longer. I needed concrete evidence, something irrefutable that would lay bare the truth I feared but needed to confront. That night, with Rachel still in the shower, I took a calculated risk and installed a spy app on her phone. It was a desperate move, but I needed to know who this Chris really was and what he meant to her. The app gave me access to her messages, call logs, and even her location. It didn't take long before I found what I was looking for. Their texts were a mixture of mundane conversations and overtly sexual messages. The words cut through me like a knife, expressions of longing, secret rendezvous, and explicit plans that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. My heart raced as I scrolled through months of messages, each one a new betrayal. They had been careful, using coded language and deleting messages, but the app had captured enough. The details of their affair were laid bare, from their first tentative flirtations to their passionate declarations of love. One message in particular stood out. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow night. I've got something special planned for us." My mind spun with the implications. Tomorrow night, she was planning to meet him again. I knew I had to act. The next day, I arranged for the kids to stay with my parents for the night, telling Rachel that I had a work emergency and would be home late. She didn't question it, too preoccupied with her own plans. I followed her discreetly, my heart pounding as I trailed her car to the same house I'd seen her enter weeks before. This time, I was prepared. I parked a few houses down and waited until she went inside. Then, with my phone in hand, I approached the house, peering through the windows until I found them in the living room. Rachel and Chris were wrapped in each other's arms, their laughter and intimacy a stark contrast to the coldness she had shown me for months. I recorded everything, my hands shaking as I captured video evidence of their affair. The pain was almost unbearable, but I knew I needed this proof. After several agonizing minutes, I had what I needed. I walked back to my car, my mind numb as I drove home. That night, I barely slept. The images of Rachel and Chris together played over and over in my mind, fueling my anger and heartbreak. By morning, I had resolved to confront her with the evidence and demand an explanation. When Rachel returned home, she was in high spirits, a stark contrast to the turmoil roiling inside me. She greeted me with a kiss, which I coldly rebuffed. "We need to talk," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. She looked puzzled, but followed me to the living room. I set my phone on the table and played the video. Her face went from confusion to horror as she watched herself with Chris. "What is this, Rachel? How long has this been going on?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt no sympathy. "Mike, I can explain," she stammered, reaching out to me. I pulled away, my voice cold. "Explain what? That you've been lying to me? That you've been having sex with another man while I've been here taking care of our kids and working to support us?" She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. "It was a mistake, Mike. It didn't mean anything. I was lonely, and he was there. I'm so sorry." Her words only fueled my anger. "A mistake? You call months of deceit and betrayal a mistake? You've destroyed our family, Rachel. How could you do this to us?" Rachel continued to cry, but her apologies felt hollow. The woman I thought I knew, the life we had built together, had all been a lie. I left the room, unable to bear the sight of her, knowing that our lives would never be the same again. The day after I confronted Rachel with the evidence, the atmosphere in our house was thick with tension. Rachel avoided eye contact, her movements around the house mechanical and robotic. I spent the day mulling over my options, knowing that the confrontation wasn't over. That evening, after putting the kids to bed, I asked her to sit down in the living room. Rachel sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I remained standing, too restless to sit. The silence stretched between us, the weight of unspoken words pressing down on both of us. "Rachel," I began, my voice steady but cold. "I need you to tell me everything. No more lies, no more half-truths. I deserved to know the whole story. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Mike, I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. How long has it been going on? I asked, cutting through her apology. She hesitated, then sighed. About 6 months. My heart clenched at the confirmation. Why, Rachel? What did I do wrong? It wasn't you, she said quickly. It was never about you. I felt lonely. Chris was there, and it just happened. It just happened, I echoed, anger flaring. You don't just accidentally fall into bed with someone, Rachel. You made a choice. Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head. I know I did. And it was wrong. But things between us had become so routine, so predictable. I needed excitement, something new. So you threw away our life together for some thrill? I asked, my voice rising. For what? Sex? It wasn't just sex, she whispered. It was the way he made me feel. Wanted, desired. I turned away, running my hands through my hair, trying to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside me. And what about us, Rachel? What about our family? I never wanted to hurt you or the kids, she sobbed. I was selfish. I know that now. But please, Mike, I want to make it right. I want to fix this. Her words sounded desperate, but they didn't reach me. The betrayal was too deep, the wound too fresh. How do you propose to fix this, Rachel? How do you come back from something like this? We can go to counseling, she suggested, wiping her tears. We can work through this, together. I shook my head, disbelief and anger boiling over. Counseling? You think talking to some stranger about your affair is going to make it all better? It's a start, she pleaded. We owe it to ourselves, to the kids, to try. Her words hung in the air, but they felt empty to me. The trust between us was shattered, and no amount of counseling could glue the pieces back together. I don't know if I can do that, Rachel. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. Rachel broke down, crying into her hands. I watched her, feeling a mix of anger and pity. She had brought this upon herself, but seeing her like this made me question everything. Was there any part of me that still loved her? Could we salvage anything from the wreckage of our marriage? Before I could say anything more, the front door opened, and Sarah and Lizzie walked in, returning from their sleepover at my parents'. Their cheerful chatter filled the room, a stark contrast to the tense silence that had enveloped us moments before. Rachel quickly wiped her tears and forced a smile, while I struggled to keep my emotions in check. Daddy, Mommy, we're home, Sarah exclaimed, running to hug us both. I bent down to hug her, my heart aching with the knowledge of how this would affect them. Hey, sweetheart, did you have fun? Yes! Grandma let us bake cookies! Lizzie chimed in, her face lighting up. That's great, I said, forcing a smile. Why don't you two go wash up for dinner? As they ran off, Rachel and I exchanged a look, the weight of our situation heavy in the air. This was far from over, and the road ahead was uncertain and fraught with pain. But for now, we had to put on a brave face for our children, even as the foundations of our family crumbled beneath us. The days following the confrontation with Rachel were some of the most challenging of my life. Her pleas for forgiveness echoed in my mind, but my resolve hardened. She needed to understand the full weight of her betrayal, and I was determined to ensure she did. First, I gathered all the evidence, messages, videos, photos, and call logs. Each piece was a painful reminder of her infidelity, but it was also a weapon I could use to dismantle the life she had built on lies. I made multiple copies and stored them securely. Then, I reached out to a friend in law enforcement, seeking advice on how to handle things without crossing any legal boundaries. My plan took shape. I was going to hit Rachel and Chris where it hurt the most. I discovered that Chris had a bit of a checkered past, minor legal troubles that I could use to my advantage. I compiled everything into a neat package, ensuring it was ready for the right moment. Rachel announced she had a business trip planned. It was the perfect opportunity. I packed up the kids and dropped them off at my parents' house, under the guise of a fun weekend visit. Then, I set to work. With Rachel out of the house, I installed hidden cameras in the living room and bedroom. It wasn't something I ever imagined doing, but desperate times called for desperate measures. That night, I monitored the camera feeds through my phone. Watching Rachel and Chris together was like a knife twisting in my gut, but it steeled my resolve. I recorded everything, making sure I had undeniable proof of their affair. The next morning, I reviewed the footage, my hands trembling with rage and a grim sense of satisfaction. This was the evidence I needed. Rachel returned home from her trip, oblivious to what awaited her. I continued to act normally, though it became increasingly difficult each time I looked at her. Every smile, every casual touch, was a reminder of her deceit. Finally, the day came when I was ready to confront her and execute my plan for revenge. I waited until the kids were at school, ensuring they wouldn't witness the confrontation. I set up the laptop on the dining room table, queued up the videos, and called Rachel to sit down. She walked in, smiling as she set her purse down. "Hey, honey, how was your day?" "Sit down, Rachel," I said, my voice colder than I intended. She looked puzzled, but did as I asked. I hit play on the video, and her expression changed from confusion to horror as she watched herself and Chris on the screen. "What is this?" she stammered, her face draining of color. "This," I said, gesturing to the laptop, "is the end of our marriage." Rachel started to cry, trying to reach for my hand, but I pulled away. "Mike, I can explain." "No," I interrupted, standing up and pacing the room. "You don't get to explain. I've seen enough. I've heard enough. You've been lying to me, cheating on me, and making a fool out of me in my own home." Tears streamed down her face, but I felt no sympathy. "I trusted you, Rachel. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me." "I'm sorry, Mike. I'm so sorry," she sobbed, but her words felt hollow. "Sorry isn't good enough," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm filing for divorce. I've already spoken to a lawyer. You need to pack your things and leave. I can't look at you right now." Rachel's cries grew louder, but I didn't waver. "Think about the kids, Mike. Please. Let's talk about this. We can fix it." "You should have thought about the kids before you decided to cheat," I said coldly. "You've destroyed this family, and I won't let you continue to hurt us. Pack your things and go now." With that, I left the room, needing to get away from her. As I walked out of the house, I felt a mix of pain and relief. This was just the beginning of a long, painful journey, but at least now I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. Next, I turned my attention to Chris. He had inserted himself into my family and violated my trust. He needed to face the consequences of his actions. First, I did some digging into his life. He was a college student with a clean record, aside from some minor legal troubles. Knowing his routine and background helped me plan my next move. I decided to hit him where it would hurt the most: his reputation and future. I compiled all the evidence I had of their affair: the videos, the text messages, and the incriminating photos. I saved everything on multiple USB drives, making sure I had backup copies stored safely. One evening, I drove to Chris's apartment, my hands shaking with anger as I knocked on his door. When he answered, the smug look on his face vanished the moment he saw me. "Mike, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk," I said, pushing past him into the apartment. He didn't dare stop me. I walked into his living room and sat down, glaring at him. "Sit." He sat down across from me, his face pale. "Look, man, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen," I scoffed. "Didn't mean for it to happen? You've been screwing my wife for months. Don't insult me with your apologies." He opened his mouth to say something, but I cut him off. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to listen, and you're going to do exactly as I say. If you don't, I'll make sure everyone in your life knows what kind of person you are." I pulled out one of the USB drives and tossed it onto the table. "On that drive is everything: videos, texts, pictures. I've got copies stored in multiple places. If you try anything, I'll release it all to your college, your professors, your family, and every potential employer I can find." Chris's eyes widened in fear as he picked up the USB drive, realizing the gravity of the situation. "What do you want from me?" "First, you're going to quit your job as our babysitter effective immediately. You're going to stay away from my family and never contact Rachel again. Understood?" He nodded vigorously. "Yes, I understand." "Good. Second, you're going to write a letter of apology to my children. They may not understand everything now, but one day they will. You owe them that much." Chris swallowed hard and nodded again. "I'll do it. I promise." "Third," I continued, "you're going to inform your college about what you've done. Tell them you've been involved in inappropriate conduct and need to step back from your responsibilities. If you don't, I'll make sure they find out anyway." His face turned even paler, but he didn't argue. He knew he had no other choice. "I'll tell them." I stood up, towering over him. "Remember, Chris, I've got copies of everything. If I hear that you've tried to contact Rachel or caused any trouble, I'll destroy you. Do you understand?" He nodded, trembling. "I understand. I won't do anything, I swear." I left his apartment, feeling a sense of grim satisfaction. It wasn't enough to heal the wound Rachel and Chris had inflicted, but it was a start. I had taken control of the situation and made sure Chris would face the consequences of his actions. The next day, I received an email from Chris. It was a scanned copy of the letter he had written to my children, filled with apology and regret. I didn't know if my kids would ever read it, but it was something. He also informed me that he had resigned from his job and contacted his college, admitting to his misconduct. With my revenge on Chris executed and my anger slightly tempered, it was time to face the inevitable, divorcing Rachel. This would be a long, grueling process, but it was necessary for my healing and the well-being of our children. I had already consulted with a divorce lawyer and gathered all the evidence of Rachel's infidelity to support my case. The weeks that followed were a mix of legal battles and emotional turmoil. The divorce proceedings were grueling, with Rachel fighting me every step of the way. She was furious about the custody arrangements, and our interactions were limited to cold, formal exchanges about logistics and the children. The distance between us grew even more pronounced, and the once warm home now felt like a battleground. One evening, I received a text from Rachel asking me to meet her at the park near our house. It was an unusual request, and I was hesitant, but I agreed. I left the kids with my parents for the evening and walked to the park, the air heavy with the scent of blooming flowers and the distant sounds of children playing. Rachel was sitting on a bench, her posture tense, her eyes red from crying. I approached cautiously, unsure of what to expect. "Mike, thank you for coming," she said, her voice trembling. I nodded, keeping my distance. "What do you want, Rachel?" She took a deep breath, looking down at her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I wanted to talk one last time before everything is finalized. I know I've hurt you, and I've been thinking a lot about what you said." I crossed my arms, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Thinking about what? The lies? The betrayal?" She winced at my words, but continued. "Yes, all of it. I can't change what I did, but I need you to understand why it happened." I shook my head. "I don't need your justifications, Rachel. I need you to understand the damage you've done." "I do understand, Mike," she insisted, tears streaming down her face. "I was lonely, and I felt unappreciated. Chris made me feel wanted, but it was a mistake, a terrible mistake." "That's not an excuse," I replied coldly. "You could have talked to me, tried to fix things, but you chose to cheat instead." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with regret. "I know, and I'm sorry. I know that's not enough, but it's all I have left to give." The silence between us was heavy, filled with the weight of unspoken words and shattered dreams. Finally, Rachel broke the silence. "What about the kids, Mike? How do we make this right for them?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "We be honest with them, but we don't burden them with our issues. They deserve to know the truth, but not the details. We need to show them that we can still be their parents, even if we're not together." She nodded, wiping her tears. "You're right. We owe them that much." I stood up, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. "Is that all, Rachel?" She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Do you think you could ever forgive me, Mike?" I paused, considering her question. "Forgiveness isn't something that comes easily, Rachel. Maybe one day, but not now." She nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I understand." I turned to leave, but she called out to me one last time. "Mike, I know I don't deserve it, but I hope you find happiness. You deserve it." I didn't reply, walking away from the woman who had once been my everything. As I made my way back to the house, I felt a strange sense of closure. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope for the future. The courtroom was cold, the air heavy with the tension of what was to come. Rachel sat across from me, her once vibrant face now marked with lines of stress and worry. The trial had been a long time coming, a drawn-out battle of wills that had left both of us drained and emotionally battered. Our lawyers went through the usual pre-trial motions, each trying to gain an upper hand. Rachel's lawyer painted her as a victim of neglect, a woman who had turned to another man only out of loneliness. My lawyer countered with the evidence I had painstakingly gathered, showing the extent of her deceit and betrayal. The judge, a stern woman with piercing eyes, called the court to order. "We are here today to determine the dissolution of the marriage between Michael and Rachel," she began. "The evidence presented will help us decide the terms of custody and asset division." Rachel's lawyer presented their case first. He spoke at length about the pressures Rachel faced, her high-stress job, and the lack of emotional support at home. Rachel dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her performance convincing, if not for the glaring reality of her infidelity. When it was my lawyer's turn, he didn't hold back. He laid out the evidence clearly and methodically. Messages, videos, and photos, each one a blow to Rachel's facade of innocence. The room was silent as the evidence was displayed, the weight of her actions hanging heavily in the air. Rachel looked defeated, her shoulders slumped as she listened to the details of her betrayal being laid bare. When it was her turn to speak, she stood, her voice shaking. "I made mistakes," she admitted. "I was lonely, and I made choices I regret. But I love my children, and I want to do what's best for them." I felt a pang of sadness. Despite everything, she was still the mother of my children, and I knew this was as hard on her as it was on me. But the damage was done, and our lives had been irrevocably altered. The judge called a recess before delivering her verdict. I stepped outside, the cool air a welcome relief from the stifling atmosphere of the courtroom. My lawyer joined me, his expression grim. "We have a strong case, Mike. The evidence is on our side." I nodded, but the sense of impending finality weighed heavily on me. This wasn't just about winning. It was about the future of our children, and the life we had built together crumbling to dust. After the recess, we returned to the courtroom. The judge took her seat, her expression unreadable. "I have reviewed the evidence and considered the testimonies," she began. "This is a difficult case, but the evidence clearly shows a pattern of deceit and betrayal." Rachel's face crumpled as the judge continued. "Given the circumstances, I'm granting Michael full custody of Sarah and Lizzie. Rachel, you will have visitation rights, but primary custody will remain with Michael." A wave of relief washed over me, mixed with the sadness of what had been lost. Rachel began to cry, her lawyer placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. The judge concluded with the division of assets, awarding me the house and a significant portion of our savings. Rachel was left with her car and personal belongings, a stark reminder of the consequences of her actions. As the gavel came down, signaling the end of the trial, I felt a sense of closure. The road ahead would be challenging, but I had taken the necessary steps to protect my children and begin the process of healing. Rachel approached me as we left the courtroom. "Mike, I know you hate me, but please, let's try to make this as easy as possible for the kids." I nodded, the anger giving way to a tired acceptance. "For the kids, Rachel. We owe them that much." With that, we parted ways, the final chapter of our marriage closing behind us as we stepped into the uncertain future. In the weeks following the finalization of the divorce, I focused on rebuilding my life. The pain of Rachel's betrayal was still fresh, but I was determined to create a stable and happy environment for my children and myself. I poured my energy into my work, took up new hobbies, and reconnected with old friends who provided a supportive network that helped me stay grounded. My relationship with Jenna continued to grow. She became a constant source of support, helping me navigate the emotional aftermath of the divorce. We spent a lot of time together, going out for dinners, taking long walks in the park, and just enjoying each other's company. Her presence was a stark contrast to the chaos I had endured, bringing a sense of peace and stability that I hadn't felt in years. My children, Sarah and Lizzie, initially struggled with the changes. They were used to having both parents under one roof, and adjusting to the new normal was tough. But I made every effort to ensure their lives remained as stable as possible. We kept up with our usual routines, and I made my new place feel like home for them. Gradually, they started to see how much happier I was and began to enjoy their time with me more. One evening, Sarah came to me with tears in her eyes. "Dad, why can't we all just live together again?" she asked, her voice trembling. It broke my heart to see her like that. I pulled her into a hug and said, "Sweetie, sometimes adults have problems that they can't fix. But just because Mom and I aren't together anymore doesn't mean we love you any less. We'll always be here for you, no matter what." Over time, the kids started to understand. They saw the efforts I made to keep their lives stable and the love Jenna brought into our lives. We had movie nights, weekend trips, and moments of pure joy that slowly healed the wounds of the past. It wasn't the same as before, but it was good. As the months passed, Rachel seemed to accept that things were over. She stopped trying to sabotage my time with the kids and began focusing on her own life. It was a relief to finally have some peace, to not constantly be looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next bit of drama. Eventually, the divorce was finalized, and I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. It marked the end of a painful chapter and the beginning of a new one. A chapter where I was in control of my happiness, where I could be the father my kids deserved and the partner Jenna deserved. I took up therapy to work through the residual anger and hurt from my marriage. Each session helped me let go of the bitterness and focus on rebuilding my life. I learned to value myself and to recognize my worth. Most importantly, I learned that it was never too late to start over and build a better life. Jenna met my kids, and they adored her. She never tried to replace Rachel in their lives, but became a positive, loving presence. It was clear to me that she was someone special, someone I could see a future with. One sunny afternoon, as we were all having a picnic in the park, I looked around at the smiles and laughter and realized how far we'd come. The dark days of dealing with Rachel's betrayal felt like a distant memory. I was building a new life, one filled with hope and love. Reflecting on this journey, I realized that the pain and struggles had shaped me into a stronger, more resilient person. Life had thrown curveballs, but it was how we responded to those challenges that defined us. I was grateful for the support of my friends, family, and especially Jenna, who stood by me through it all. To anyone going through something similar, know that there is hope. It might be hard, and it might take time, but you deserve to be happy. Don't settle for less than you deserve. And remember, you are stronger than you think. Thank you for reading my story and for all the support you've given me. Here's to new beginnings and finding happiness, no matter how long it takes. As I looked forward to each new day and experience, I knew that I had not only moved on, I had moved up.